Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the latest in the Gowling WLG Scheme Sessions webinars. Really excited about today because of our topic, nature, and because of our great panelists who are going to talk to us about that. Before I introduce the panelists, just a few housekeeping notes. So first of all, in terms of timing, we're looking to run this webinar until 1 p.m. We will finish by 1 p.m. to let you all get off to lunch and your next things. At the bottom of your screens, you should see a Q&A button. Please feel free to use that if you want to submit any questions on about today's discussion. We will try to pick up as many questions as we can. If we don't pick up your question, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And finally, just to let you know, this is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again, share it with your family and friends as you see fit later. Okay, so the topic is nature and pensions investment. This is a really interesting and timely topic for pension schemes. We are looking to address today the practical elements of this in terms of smaller schemes and bigger schemes. We've got a wide variety of people who are joining us today from those different types of schemes, from the advisory community, the regulatory community, and other asset managers. So we'll be looking to really focus on the practical issues. It's also timely, and we'll be hearing from some of the panelists. The government published its environmental improvement plan on Monday, so we'll be picking that up. That's very timely for this discussion. So to introduce our excellent panelists, first up, we've got Bobby Riddaway. Bobby is an independent trustee. He's managing director of HS Trustees, over 30 years experience in pensions and the investment world, and is the founder and chair of the Trustees Sustainability Working Group, which is a cross-industry group of asset owners aiming to improve sustainability practices in UK pensions. Mark Thompson. Mark has been involved in pension investment activities for over 35 years, 24 of those at the Prudential M&G, where he undertook a variety of pension investment related roles, and 8 years as CIO of the HSBC UK pension scheme, where he designed and implemented its market leading climate change strategies. And Mark's now on a number of pension scheme boards and investment committees. And last but not least, Ben Stansfield. Ben is the head of sustainability at Gowling WLG, one of the leading environmental lawyers in the UK, and very pleasingly just picked up the Natural Resources and Environment Team of the Year award at the British Legal Awards for him and his team. So Ben advises a number of our clients across a broad spectrum of industries on climate and sustainability issues. So a very warm welcome to all three of you, and thank you for joining us. So let's kick off. Let's kick off at the start, really. So what do we mean when we talk about nature-related risk? And I guess a lot of the audience will be interested to know, how's that different to climate change and climate-related risk? And Bobby, maybe a kick off with you.
Yeah. So climate and nature are inextricably linked. We lose carbon when we cut down forests, and we release carbon when we dig up peat bogs. And if you don't look into nature, you haven't looked into it, you find that most of nature is very financially beneficial or detrimental, depending on what you do with it. So it's not one of these esoteric small asset classes that you might think of thematic. It's very much the core of how we drive the economy in not just in the UK but in the world.
Great, thanks, Bobby. Mark, how about you, and why is it important to you?
Well, I think it's the World Economic Forum said that 50% of global GDP depends on nature or is nature related. So, I mean, that shows the scale of it, as Bobby was saying. But I think it's interesting when you start thinking about nature and compare it to climate, because as Bobby said, they're very, very, very linked. And as pension schemes, we've got quite used to thinking about climate. But climate on one level is so much easier because it's all about carbon, really. When you're talking about nature, it's far more multifaceted, and it depends on the location you're talking about. There's an index that was done by because of that, it's very hard to get one measure. You have to look at lots of different measures depending on where you are.
Mhm.
One measure that I have seen that tries to sort of summarize it is the Natural History Museum. They're called the Biodiversity Intactness Index, the BII. And that's a measure that looks at a particular area, say the UK. And if it was pristine from a biodiversity point of view, it would get a rating of 100. And if it was really, really bad, it would be, 1. I think the last time I looked, the UK was about a 57.
Right.
And I think those kind of measures are quite interesting because you can start thinking, well, what is it? What can you do to make your 57 and never get to be 100, but to make it better? So it's very much depends on location. But the risks is the important bit. I mean, if we don't take this seriously, you've got risks of companies that are investing in these, that's living off the biodiversity externalities and getting a free ride. That's going to hit them. There's transition risks like climate, regulatory change, reputational risks. And finally, as I would just say, as Bobby says, if you've got climate targets and you're not thinking about the biodiversity side, it's kind of one-handed clapping, really. You need to think of them both together.
And Ben, you'd agree with that from your perspective? I know
Yeah,
you're advising a number of different clients in different sectors. How do they see climate and nature?
yeah. I think, I mean, I sort of talk about nature being the new carbon, that a lot of our clients, the boards have been thinking about decarbonisation, net zero greenhouse gases, all that kind of stuff for a number of years. And it's become quite political, hasn't it? You know, climate change, it wasn't it rightly or wrongly, but a lot of those terms are asking people to fly less, to go on holiday less, to drive less, and they're sort of associated with changing behaviours, which not everyone's completely comfortable with. But nature's different. You know, we all grew up falling out of trees and splashing around in pools and, you know, being outside when we were young. I think nature's pretty controversial for many of us. So because we all appreciate nature, it's an easier one to talk about and everyone in the room to sort of smile and say, yeah. So as an aside, I was at COP16, which is the biodiversity COP in 2024, and 20,000 people in the room, really behind nature, really supportive. But you compare that with a climate COP, you know, the one we just had in Belém in Brazil, and you've got 1,600 lobbyists and what have you. There are people who are saying slow that down, whereas nature isn't like that. I think everyone's pretty much completely behind it, and it's, you know, as others have said, is all the economic stuff that businesses really rely on, as well as the cultural, the tourism, the health and well-being, and what have you. And it isn't just sort of lesser spotted butterflies in a forest or a rainforest, you know, a bazillion miles away. You know, nature impacts are real for all of us. You know, it's food, it's drink. You know, there's this sort of phrase, we're 9 meals away from anarchy. If people don't get to eat, you know, they'll be rioting on the streets pretty quickly. So it's just so fundamental to what we're talking about. And you mentioned the environmental improvement plan, which obviously government knew that we were talking today, and thought, you know, how can we make it even more topical? And there's just a few little headlines in there which I really liked, actually. So it talked about it valued English nature assets at 1.2 trillion. Now, I'm not entirely sure how they do that, but with 60 million people in England, that's, you know, £23,000 of value in nature per person. It's huge. In 2022, it talked about 8.3 million tonnes of carbon was removed by trees. That would cost £2.3 billion if we went and bought carbon credits out in the market. So that's a huge economic value. And then slightly more sort of narrowly focused, it talks about 900 nature-related businesses in 2024. And we can talk about sort of the growth and where those businesses are and what they do. They employed 21,000 people and had a 2 billion turnover. This is not niche stuff. This is a mainstream asset. And final point, Rishi Sunak, when he was in Prime Minister, he talked about wanting to get private sector investment into nature in England and Wales, in the UK rather. And he said that we can get 500 million of private investment into nature by 2027 and 1 billion by 2030. So we're well on the way there, and we've got various policies which I'm sure we'll talk about. You know, wood and carbon, peatland carbon, nutrient neutrality, biodiversity net gain, which are providing opportunities for our clients to get stuck in and make a difference and make money too.
Great, thanks, Ben. So bringing this back to trustees then, Mark, let's start with you on this one. In terms of trustees who are sort of used to dealing with climate now, where do they start on the topic of nature?
Well, I think the first thing to do, and probably the easiest thing to do, is to get some training and from your investment consultants. The investment consultants have been doing quite a lot in this area. So get an investment consultant to come in and give your board an understanding of what we're really talking about here and how it can affect the investments that you are invested in. Now, it also, I look at it in a way, it's two ways. I can either change my investments as a result of biodiversity. I invest more in something or less in something, or what I think is equally important, and probably even maybe even more important, is how I incorporate biodiversity issues into my stewardship agenda. How I affect the stewardship. And stewardship isn't just talking to companies, it's talking to your fund managers and how your fund managers talk to the companies on the issues of debt that they invest in, and indeed up to policymakers. So if you think about it from those two angles, get a basic understanding and then try and think about, does this cause me to want to change my investment mix, or does it cause me to want to try and change how my stewardship is currently undertaken? And that stewardship might be undertaken by your fund managers, but start thinking at that level.
Bobby, same for you. Anything to add to that?
So first of all, don't switch off if you're a small scheme, because we're working on, the Trustees Sustainability Working Group is working on ways to get small schemes being able to invest in nature. And also we're working on a stewardship initiative, which we've had some success with some tiny schemes, which we're hoping to get going for small schemes. So don't switch off just because we're talking about investment or stewardship if you haven't invested in a thematic investment before, or if you haven't done stewardship before. But then what I'd add to what Mark said is there are plenty of free webinars about, especially the really interesting ones are some of these nature related managers who are out there. They tend not to be selling their funds as such. They tend to be educating pension schemes on what they are doing, why they're doing it, because they believe in the nature investments they're doing. So they're webinars or other webinars, such as the one you're in today. So well done for attending today.
Jason, can I just come back in on that? Another point I want to add to Bobby's. It's not just about nature investments. If 50% of the global GDP depends on nature, it affects all the investments that you're in. So from a stewardship perspective, it's not just about nature-related investment, it's about all investments and how biodiversity issues can affect your investments. So the stewardship aspect of that covers the entire portfolio. And if you're a small scheme, maybe you can't go and talk to the underlying issues of, in fact, even big schemes, most people don't talk to the issues of equity and debt, but you can talk to your fund managers.
And on that, I mean, let's get into that. So what sort of, from your experience, Bobby, what sort of questions would you be expecting to ask of your investment consultants or investment managers if you're going through a sort of pooled fund arrangement? What are the challenges to raise?
So I think the two major challenges at the moment, one of which was hopefully will be addressed by the report yesterday by DEFRA, which is really setting out a plan for financing nature over the next 5 to 10 years. And take stewardship to the next level. It's policymakers, it's influencing policymakers, and making sure that the government sets the right framework for nature to thrive, and they are making, because it's so much easier to see what nature is. It's causing floods. It's actually causing disasters to people in the UK at the moment. It's quite easy to get buy-in from the government. So encourage your consultants and your fund managers to get involved in initiatives, and again, as we launch. The Trustees Sustainability Working Group is going to launch a couple of initiatives next year which need industry buy-in. And by buy-in, we need buy-in from those fund managers and investment consultants. So in any way you can influence them to help us with that, that would be great. And then it's then about helping getting the investments in. And a lot of the investments are not the traditional investments pension schemes would be invested in. So you're talking private equity, you're talking private debt, you're talking infrastructure, and this needs to be pooled. And the plan yesterday does talk about financing this. You need big financiers to come alongside to help. But again, you need anybody who's actually being used to pooling investments to get involved and it will be industry solutions as well. We will need to have big nature funds that are diversified, that are open to small schemes on a pooled basis. And I just finalised that by saying, don't look at this as a theme. There's been loads of themes gone on, and look at this as if all my growth assets are in an index tracking fund, why wouldn't I invest 20% of that to help drive improvement in nature in the UK, given how fundamental it is to the UK economy, and because of how fundamental it is, and because the government's starting to get behind it, these investments should be generally successful. You're not talking about throwing money away for some moral reason. You're actually talking about making money as you improve the UK for your pension members.
Thanks, Bobby. And Mark, you were talking about the stewardship piece, and so in terms of what questions should be, as a trustee, you should be asking the investment managers for them to challenge their sort of underlying companies and so on. What are those questions? Because if everything is affected by nature, what are the questions to ask?
Well, I think you've got to start somewhere. Yeah. And for what I've been doing is that in terms of my fund managers generally, not just nature related fund managers, just fund managers, yeah, asking how they're incorporating biodiversity into their regular processes and for nature related risk. And often it starts with particular sectors because it's easier. Some sectors are more the obvious ones, things like deforestation, water scarcity, and that can affect a whole load of different sectors. Then there's going to be a water crisis by 2030 if there's not one already. So how they're incorporating that into their risk profiles. And the point Bobby made a while ago is that how they're incorporating thinking about the climate nexus in terms of how the climate change and biodiversity fits together. So it's pushing them on that. And in a sense, if you concentrate on a few of the material sectors, material in the sense of the large impact, you learn from that, and then you can expand out from that rather than try and do everything at once. But given I'm on a webinar with lawyers, yeah, then I think I can't resist doing this one. In the other thing you should be asking your legal advisors regularly is that what legislation is coming up that is biodiversity or nature related. Either it affects pension schemes as a whole. I mean, at the moment, TNFD isn't compulsory, but who knows? But I'm more interested in what is affecting the industries in which we invest, and I'm sure Ben will talk about that later. So what legislation is coming up that could have an effect on the value of the investments you're already in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something we really would like to get into with Ben, and then with you guys sort of challenging Ben a bit around, well, what does that mean for trustees? And Ben, just to sort of pick up there, just to start exploring Mark's theme in terms of your engagement, direct with companies, that what are the questions that your clients are asking themselves about how they will manage nature risk, that in a sense are then the questions that trustees should be pressing them on?
Yeah, I think it's really important to sort of understand that nature is more of a supply chain issue. You go to a factory or an office and there's a little bit of grass by the headquarters and there's a balancing pond at the back. That's within the fence, but 98%, 99% of nature impacts will be down the supply chain. So I think it's asking those questions, and we've covered them. Have you assessed this? Because if you can't measure it, you can't monitor it, you can't manage it. It is going to be sector sort of focused, isn't it? So yeah, development and industry. If you're putting a spade in the ground, then your business is likely to have a bigger impact. If you're in the food and drink sector, if you're in textiles, if you're growing things, or if you're a drinks manufacturer and you can replace all the raw materials that you've got with either man-made or different alternatives, but you can't get away from needing water. So it's sort of, I guess, prioritizing and asking the right questions for the right sector. Picking up Mark's point about legislation, yeah. I mean, and again, we'll talk about BNG, but it's, I think of it almost as a pilot scheme in one country for one sector, and thinking perhaps a bit more creatively, going to some conferences and thinking, what's the direction of travel? How could that mechanism in one sector affect this sector
Ben,
in 5 years? Yes.
You've just said BNG. I know what you mean, but I'm not sure everybody else will know what you
Good
mean.
point. So biodiversity net gain, I think, so this is a new policy which requires developers to increase biodiversity as part of their development by 10%. And I'll talk more at length about that. But there is legislation on the way. So we've got BNG for development. We might have it in other sectors. We've got the European Deforestation Regulation. Mark's touched on deforestation. If you are using 7 commodities which are typically grown in areas of deforestation, that's particularly, palm oil, soy, beef, leather, paper, rubber. There's probably 1 or 2 I can't remember. If those are in your supply chain, then you're going to have to demonstrate, you really actively manage your supply chain, demonstrate they're not deforestation free. Again, there's certain specified commodities, but if you're using rare earths, if you're using extractive, you're using metals, if you're using cotton in your supply chain, surely it's good practice that those due diligence principles in the EUDR, the deforestation regulation, you would adopt for other elements of your supply chain as well. So I think it's, for when we're sort of talking to corporates, it's not just having a green roof on the headquarters. It's not just doing litter picking in the local canal. Those things are really important, but actually it's looking outside the fence is really critical.
But just add as well that a lot of those things you mentioned there would come up when you were talking about climate risk as well. So that just shows how they're inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And so we talked a bit there about sort of questions that we could be asking of investment managers, and if we're a large scheme, we've got direct holdings of the companies themselves, and then bringing it back to you as trustee boards. Mark, let's start with you in terms of how do you go about integrating this into sort of risk registers and your investments overall? I mean, is this something which is kind of an add-on for you as a trustee, or in some way are you going to try and make it part of your whole risk and investment?
I think it has to be more integral to whatever you do rather than sort of on the side. Maybe a sort of a practical example that I could give. I mean, we have to write implementation statements every year now from a trustee perspective. And one of the things that you have in your implementation statement is a bit at the back that says what were the significant votes that you had for the year on topics that are consistent with your trustees' stewardship priorities. So you're meant to be setting trustee stewardship priorities. So what I've done is, in some schemes I'm involved in, is made one of those trustee stewardship priorities being biodiversity. So it brings it more to the fore in terms of when you're preparing your implementation statements, when you're talking to your fund managers, then those votes, whether it's on deforestation, water scarcity, or whatever it is, it gets into the normal flow of what the trustees are doing. Because if it's always on the side, it won't get the traction. It has to be integral.
Bobby?
I'd agree. It has to be integral, and you have to really push your consultants to help you do this, because certainly for smaller schemes, the easy answer if you ask what can we do on climate and nature and biodiversity is, well, you're in the pooled fund, you can't do anything. There's no way you can vote on all those shares. You can't even get pass-through voting. Isn't really appropriate for you. You're holding a small amount. This isn't going to work unless we get the backing of all pension schemes. Can make a difference if we get a backing of all pension schemes. So and that will come through putting pressure on the consultants and fund managers from the bottom up, and industry people putting pressure on fund managers from the top down. And I say about that, putting pressure on, but we actually all need to work together. And there's a lot of very good people in this area doing a lot of very good work. And quite often they're doing that for their scheme and they've got the resources to do that. But again, we need their expertise to be to inherit the rest, to infect the rest of the universe. And because it's so integral, we really do need to take this really seriously. And again, I'd say to small and medium schemes, don't think it's not an issue for you. It is, and you can make a difference. But not all the answers are there today as to how a small scheme can make a difference. But if we all work together, we can get those answers, and we can get industry solutions that small schemes can get involved in.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you guys are talking, I'm just thinking about, and sort of, I think came up with the climate challenge initially as well, is, should trustees not be too concerned about, perfection and somehow, being able to solve the world's problems here, but it's taking some steps and moving forward, Mark, with something concrete.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm always that pension schemes should be saving the pension, but that doesn't mean they can't also do things to save the planet at the same time. So fiduciary duty is always paramount here, and don't let perfection be the sort of the enemy of moving forward in this, because you learn by doing. The example I gave earlier, to start on a few sectors to understand them, just get going, because this is a developing area, and whatever you think is the right thing to do now, it's going to change and evolve and move. But unless you started with that and start learning about it and getting it integral to your processes, if you wait till it's all finally baked in, it'll be too late.
I just add to that as well that I saw a hedge fund manager come from the US about 6 months ago, and he wasn't a sustainable hedge fund manager, but he was trying to sell his latest best ideas for UK companies to get into his hedge fund. 95% of those companies are either climate related or biodiversity related. So this is, given the backing here, given how important it is, this is going to be a real growth area for returns as well. So this isn't just about saving the planet. This is actually about good areas of growth for investments.
So, and I mean, I think that's a really important point. So let's pick that up now, and let's maybe get into a discussion about, what does this mean in real terms, in terms of investment, and what's going on in sort of the real world in this context. And maybe Ben, I can sort of start with you here in terms of, in your world, what are you seeing, in terms of like real world real estate or infra developments? What is this BNG thing? What does that mean? What are nature banks? I think you've mentioned to me before, if I've got the phrase right. What does that mean? How does this become an investment?
Yeah, happy to do that. But I thought Bobby was making an excellent joke about hedge funds, because I was thinking about hedgerows. There's great scope for puns, but I'm just going to pick out just 2 or 3 things, or maybe a few more, from the Environmental Improvement Plan, which is a brilliant read, because it's basically your business plan in a way, because it's government saying these are all the goals and the commitments we're going to make around nature. Here are the laws. Here's the actions we're going to take, and therefore for businesses and organizations, this is how you can play a part. So just in terms of some short-term actions, we've got early 2026, government going to respond to its consultation on how you get private sector investment into nature recovery. Later on, they're going to do a report on how to streamline and strengthen nature markets. British Standards are producing some guidance. There's going to be a policy around private investment in woodland creation. And then in terms of some actual numbers, so government have said we're going to create some new forests. We're going to allocate over £1 billion in this parliament to tree planting. We're going to create policies which encourage 250,000 hectares of wildlife-rich habitats by December 2030. We're going to increase tree canopy and woodland cover by 1/3%. Doesn't sound a lot, but that's 43,000 hectares. If you're a landowner, there's money in trees. We're going to create, and this is Bobby's point, what made me think about it, 48,000 kilometres of hedgerows by 2037, 72,500 kilometres of hedgerows by 2050. The circumference of the Earth is 40,000 kilometres. So we're going to plant hedges that go around the world at least 1 and a bit times. And we're going to increase salt marsh by 15% by 2009 levels, seagrass by 15%, and oyster reef habitats at ecosystem scales at 5 or 8 different bodies. And go and check out Oyster Heaven, who are doing this off the Norfolk coast. So those are just a few sort of headlines that the government's trying to set policy to achieve. Right, so biodiversity net gain. So we've talked about getting private money, private investment into nature, and biodiversity net gain, I think, is the jewel in the crown. We have got other schemes: woodland carbon, peatland carbon, hedgerow carbon might come one day. Nutrient neutrality has been around for a while, but biodiversity net gain rules say if you are developing a piece of land, you have to do a baseline assessment of your site, work out your biodiversity score, and once you've built your development, you have got to have hit 10% gain. So once you've taken a field in Essex, I live in Basildon, you take your field, you give it an initial score, you put your 100 houses on there, and obviously take away a lot of the land and lots of the biodiversity, you've got to increase by 10% against the baseline. And that might mean that you're going to put part of your site, you're going to do some habitat improvements at the edge of the site. But and that's a popular method. But if you've got kids like my boys and dogs and cats, that's not necessarily a great place for biodiversity. If you're a bumblebee, would you want to go to the on-site solution? And so it's created this new sort of asset class of habitat banks, where landowners and sort of ecologist whizzes have taken on land and they've said, right, it's pretty sparse in biodiversity. It's pretty degraded. Might have had lots of sort of, tens of years of intensive farming, so pesticides, fertilizers, all this kind of stuff. Let's strip away all of that stuff. Let's put in some woodland. Let's put in some wetland area. Let's do some native species meadows. Let's do all these sort of habitat enhancements. Habitat and nature scores go through the roof. The biodiversity scores go through the roof, and that creates units that can then be sold to developers who are really good at building houses and logistics centres and energy projects, but they're not ecologists. They're not great at maintaining these things for 30 years. So the BNG policy has created a new industry, essentially. And it's saying you can satisfy your legal obligations if you're in the development world by buying compliance products. You can buy a compliance unit, a biodiversity unit from someone who's really good at this. That's all they're going to do for the next 30 years is look after this land. And it means that there's just been a huge growth in sort of ecological and biodiversity consultancies, businesses that are doing maintenance and management of these projects for 30 years. It's created habitat banks, which we didn't have previously. So entities like the Environment Bank, Wild Capital, Ground Control, and lots of other specialist outfits who might be doing orchards or this, that, and the other. It's creating value in land which you necessarily couldn't come for development, or which was otherwise in farming, which hasn't been great for biodiversity. Landowners, I've got estates who, or other developers who are struggling to get planning for some sites. So they're saying, right, well, we're going to do our own habitat bank, and we'll generate units that we can allocate to our different developments within our group company. I've got a large city institution who's got a magnificent portfolio of sites, and one they've struggled with 200 hectares in England, and they're saying, right, we're going to put half of that into woodland. We're going to do a really interesting tree planting that's going to create sort of carbon sequestration opportunities, and we're going to do our own insetting. So instead of buying carbon credits on the other side of the world, we're going to do carbon sequestration, and we're going to retire those credits for ourselves. The rest of the site we'll put into biodiversity net gain, because that helps generate some income. What else are we doing? Infrastructure owners. So power stations, harbours, ports, they're saying, right, well, how can we obviously have to protect our assets, our harbour walls, for example. So let's do a salt marsh. That's great for habitats. It's generating units that we can then sell into the market to local developers, and it's protecting our assets and all these wonderful benefits. And as I say, it's currently sort of in what we call the town and country planning area. So it's housing, it's industrial, it's offices. But from February next year, it's going to apply to what we call NSIP, so these nationally strategic infrastructure projects, so big power stations, airports, runways, all that kind of stuff. And the government have said we want to build 150 infrastructure projects in the next Parliament. And so NSIPs will be subject to this biodiversity net gain rule, and that's going to create potentially it's going to sort of turbocharge the market for biodiversity units. So we're hoping more landowners will be generating units, more developers will be doing it. It's had its teething troubles, but it's getting there.
Can I ask you a question then, from a pension fund perspective? Then the fact that the biodiversity net gains is currently affecting sort of, let's call it, property developers, and it will widen out, as you say. I should know that from the point of view if I'm investing in any of those things, because it's going to have an impact on the investments that I've already got. But then I think what you're also saying is that there's going to be these new land banks or whatever you call them, yeah, which is really an investment. You could invest in that, and I think it's still an early market for us really in this. But you could invest in that land or that wood, etc. That you're an owner of that, and that creates credits which would then be sold on to these developers, etc. Or even at an extreme, there could be a fund that just buys the credits and hoping that the credit's going to go up in value. So it's kind of an interesting area from my perspective, because I can see how this is going to have to grow quite materially, because my understanding is that these biodiversity credits for the BNG, they have to be in the UK. Is that's correct as well, isn't it?
And at the moment it's just in England. Scotland is looking at something similar. Wales is going to do the same. So that's why it's probably half to two-thirds of my day BNG for one or two sectors in England. So that's why I sort of sometimes think of it as a pilot scheme, but it's got huge significance. And certainly some of the habitat banks, England is the only country, I think, that has this mandatory sector-specific restoration unit system. Other countries are looking at BNG, Scandinavia, France, Germany, Holland, thinking, oh, actually, that might be something that we could do. So a habitat bank, some of the canny habitat banks have got phenomenal expertise from doing it in England and are still broadening out their habitat bank bases. Are looking overseas and saying, well, actually, how can I export my expertise and grow my business 10, 20, 30 times? So yes, the habitat banks are absolutely ripe for investment and growth. And you're also right to say that it's a regulation that impacts the property development industry. And certainly there are a number of schemes I've been involved with where the BNG has been too high. The price tag for units or what would need to be replaced has made the site unviable. So it's making some sites very challenging to develop, and that needs to be explored too when making investments in businesses that are in that space.
Also very local as well. So I've come across companies doing this in parts of the country where they weren't aware that anyone would be interested in investing in it, and they're struggling to raise capital. So the more we get the conversation going in the general population, the more chance of these all joining up together and being successful. And I think we are at a relatively early stage in all this, because biodiversity net gain's been around for about a year.
Yeah, it's about 18 months, and I always sort of liken nature markets and natural capital as an investment asset class. I sort of liken it to the offshore wind farm industry. So when I started my career, December 2000, I think the first two offshore wind turbines were installed, and they were both 2 megawatts each, in 10 meters deep water and about 2 kilometers from the coastline. And now we've got 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. We've got turbines that are 15 and 15 megawatts each, not just 2. So an industry in 25 years has just gone from a really small seedling, try and get my nature puns in, to this,
I noticed you used lichen earlier, Ben, as well. That was a very clever one.
That was a little bit too clever for even me to notice I was doing it. But in the same way, offshore wind has you start out in this experimental phase and it explodes and becomes really super investable and mainstream. I think nature's like that too. That BNG is almost our pilot scheme. We're learning how to do it, how to do the governance, where the money's coming from, what the offtake looks like, the unit sales. And I'm sure if we come back in 3, 5, 10, or even 25 years, it'll be so mainstream, it'll be completely vanilla stuff.
So we sort of covered now, it seems to me, sort of 3 areas so far. We sort of talked about the stewardship piece, the questioning, checking, making our managers and our ultimate investor entities answer to the nature question. I've heard now a bit there from that discussion about trustees being aware of the nature impact in relation to their investments and the direct investments. And then the third piece I think we're starting to get into now is how do we actually access and utilize nature in itself as an investment? And I guess, Mark, I'll be interested in any thoughts now about how that feels from a practical perspective at this stage for a trustee on that third one? I mean, are we feeling that, you know, that is something that if you're a large scheme, maybe you can now start to really get into that, or is this still a bit of a way off for you?
Well, for the large private sector schemes, there are funds available now. And a lot of local authorities are doing some investment here. I think for smaller schemes at this point, it's very hard to do a direct investment in nature. And unfortunately, one of the funds that was trying to take off last year had really good backing because there's really good people running the fund and taking advantage of biodiversity net gain. It had a couple of investors pull out earlier this year and had to basically withdraw and stop funding. So it's not only new, we need to generate the demand, and it's a bit of a catch-22 for most schemes. And when I talk about small schemes, I'm really talking about sub 10 billion. I'm not talking about sub 100
Right.
billion. I'm talking about them as well. But
Yeah.
for the vast majority of UK pension schemes, we need some sort of pooled solution here. And we also need to change the due diligence model. So historically, if you're going to invest in an investment, you get the consultant to do a long list, a short list. They've got 5 years performance history. You've got to flip that on its head, and you've got to just think, well, actually, we want the due diligence on whether this fund is suitable, and that's what you're required to do by legislation. And the thing that gives me encouragement that this might happen is it links right into the government's growth agenda, because this is about UK, and this is where pensions can make a difference in the UK, make money in the UK, and actually improve the life of their members. So it's quite unique in that way, and if that can lead to relatively large amounts of short-term money into the UK if the framework's there and if we all work together to make it happen.
Mark?
Well, if you're talking about purely nature-related investments, as opposed to all investments that are affected by nature, then I think, you know, Bobby made the point about large schemes, small schemes, and I agree with him. But it's also, you know, if we're saying that this should be integral to everything you do, it also depends on what type of scheme you are as well. I mean, if you're a DC scheme, yeah, where you've got illiquidity issue or liquidity issues, then the fact that we've now got LTAFs and it's moving in that direction, then more could be done within an LTAF within a DC scheme, particularly in the larger ones, the master trusts, etc. If you're an open DB scheme, and particularly like the LGPS, then it's easier from that point of view to get involved in these type of things. But if you're a closed corporate scheme, then maybe there's less opportunity for these nature-related investments because you're on the way to buy-in. Now that might change to some degree if we end up getting into running on with surplus sharing, except that kind of thing. But it's early days on that. So it really depends, not just big and small. It also depends on what type of scheme you are, because this should be integral to everything else you're doing.
Thanks, Mark. And Ben, coming back to you then, in terms of some of the, you know, what's actually happening in the real world, from your perspective, to enable asset owners like trustees of pension schemes to both have a better understanding of nature-related risk and more opportunities to take nature-related opportunities in their investment strategies. What's your wish list for the government, for policymakers, for organisations working together here that could turbocharge this over the next few years? What would you like to see?
I think in many ways, this is a pop-out response. I think we've got our wish list in that we've got a government at the moment which is taking nature really seriously. Mary Cray, our nature minister, and the others, DEFRA, get it. And they're working internationally. You know, the UK has always been a leader, I think, in nature conservation for various reasons. And so we've got a government that gets it, and we had a Conservative government who got it as well, actually. So this is sort of apolitical. We've got investors who are increasingly interested in it, and it's really interesting to see how, you know, the sort of the international, you know, New York Climate Week and the COPs are focusing on nature and food production and what have you, not just the renewables, the EVs, the stuff we've been doing for a few years. I think one sort of word of warning that we had with, again, going back to the offshore wind, is that you had this new policy coming in, you had government regulations and incentives around it with renewable obligation certificates and feed-in tariffs. And sometimes they're a little bit too generous, and you almost had a period in the early days of offshore wind where government every other week was adjusting the ROC levels, you know, the green certificates, how many you got per megawatt hour, and that really impacted investor confidence. So I suppose the plea is more to the investor community to have that patience and expect a bit of a rocky ride. The idea that you could, as a government or legislative body, put in this new policy and expect it to be perfect from day one is a little fanciful. So it isn't going to be as stable as you might hope. But again, going back to that ERP, that sends you a market signal. That's telling you the direction of travel and how seriously it's being taken. So I don't think there's much going wrong at the market, which I know isn't a controversial take for a webinar. But actually, I think it's all moving in the right
Sounds
direction.
good news, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
We sort of touched on this earlier, and this sort of comes back to what trustees need to do in terms of reporting what they're doing in this area. And we've obviously had the TCFD reporting, and I guess I was just interested, Bobby, to start with you in terms of your views on reporting about nature. And is the TNFD, is that a good thing, a bad thing? What do you think?
Oh, firstly, we talk about companies working in the economy, then I think TNFD is a good thing because they need to understand their supply chains, as Ben said earlier. I think for pension schemes, I think this is another one that fits into the climate camp where pension schemes can make a difference, but they are not the ones who will solve nature and biodiversity, and they're not the ones who will solve climate risks. Some very, very big pension schemes are doing some very, very good work here, but the vast majority of pension schemes are not there to solve these issues. They're there to pay their members their pensions. And so I think the government is reviewing TCFD at the moment, and I think if we change the reporting so that it's appropriate to the level of influence pension schemes can have, then that should free up reporting to be able to do some reporting on this. And so my vision here is that TCFD is replaced by some transition plans which take a significant less amount of work than TCFD does, but they incorporate everything. So they incorporate all the sustainability issues, and they actually cover the actions that trustees can take, rather than, which the regulator said itself, being a backward-looking reporting with not really any actions that can be taken going forward. So I think overall, trustees need to understand this, and I think there's room for them to report on what they understand, but I'm talking about a much less resource-intensive reporting package overall for pension schemes on all these issues.
Mark, same view?
Same view in that I think TNFD is more important from a company perspective, so that get that going, that's really good. And I kind of agree with Bobby that, I mean, I think a lot of TCFD has become kind of a compliance statement now, which is sort of unfortunate, and therefore the plans that transition plans that Bob was talking about seem like a sensible thing to me. But then we haven't got to wait as trustees to be told to write a compliance report. I mean, one of the things that I've done, and I think you can do, is if you've got to write a TCFD report, we'll put a couple of paragraphs in there about biodiversity. There's no reason why you can't put it in. Just put that into your report now, if you're doing one, because it makes it integral again, and it gets the trustees thinking about it. So what can you say about biodiversity, given the nexus between climate and biodiversity? What can you say about your views on biodiversity, nature related, whether it's stewardship, and what investments you may or may not have made? You can put that in your TCFD report now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Ben, did you have you were
Yeah, just to say, you can also ask your advisors what they're doing on biodiversity and nature, and you can set the requirement there. You know, Gowling is a law firm. We don't have a huge impact on nature, but it's on our agenda for every quarterly meeting. We're trying to work out how we can reduce our biodiversity impact. So I think everyone has got a role to play, and I think trustees can sort of turn the thumbscrews a little bit, quite reasonably.
and we talked about reporting there. So who's the reporting for, right? So from your experience, Mark, Bobby, the members, I mean, do they care? Are they interested? Does it depend? What have you picked up so far?
I think this is a much more easier thing to explain to members because most members will be impacted by some of the bad effects of biodiversity. And quite a lot of the schemes that are currently being put together are things like flood defences. And that doesn't just affect members' living habitat, it actually affects insurance and it affects their income. And secondly, a lot of these schemes are generating a lot of work in areas that have got high levels of unemployment. And again, that is a real major benefit to the economy and to the local economy. And so I think it's relatively easy, and I say relatively easy, to link this investment to your actual membership and see the direct benefit it could have for your membership.
I think one of the things that pension fund trustees often struggle with, or always struggle with, is engagement with members. I mean, if I go somewhere and say I'm involved in pensions investment, people normally fall asleep. But if you start giving them a story, and it was the same with climate, but also in biodiversity and nature, people like to hear stories. And if you can actually explain what you've been doing in your scheme with regard to, even if it's just stewardship or if it is investments, and make it story related, it gets engagement with your members, and that's the holy grail for trustees, getting proper engagement with members, and this is a hook to get them involved.
So if you were, trustee of a large scheme, and we were talking earlier about this being quite linked to private market investment, whether it's with real estate or infrastructure, would you envisage, writing out to members, tell them, we've invested in this, and these are the impacts, and this is the nature impact? Is that the kind of thing you would think about doing?
Well, that kind of thing, if you can get, whether it's writing out specifically on this, but in your member newsletters and how you communicate to people, remembering, we're always doing this from a fiduciary perspective. It's going to make sense for them from an investment perspective. But if you can incorporate into that these type of, and I say stories, I don't mean like made up stories. It's true, but it's a
Yeah.
good anecdote to get people more involved in it. Then I think that's a win-win. I mean, nobody reads, not very many people read the full TCFD report that you put out. Yeah, that's more to me, that feels more like a compliance statement. If you can make things more, what's the word, consumable by members, that gets that engagement and tells the right story that is consistent with your fiduciary responsibility, you're onto a winner.
I think you're right first time round, Mark. Nobody.
And just we've got sort of 5 minutes left, so I've got one question I'll just pick up, and then we'll invite you for some closing comments, guys. So if we were sort of Ben sort of touched on this earlier, but if we roll forward 10 years, what do you think it would look like in terms of trustee investment and nature in 10 years? What do you think that might look like? Mark, maybe start with you.
Well, again, it kind of depends on the scheme you're in, doesn't it? Yeah, because I mean, assuming that you're going to be there for 10 years, some of the big DB schemes may not be there. Some of the smaller DC schemes may go into a master trust. But for schemes that are going to be there, so that DC schemes are going to be there, and open schemes, then I think it's just going to become part of what you do. Yeah, it's not going to be. It's a bit like. I remember when I first started doing ESG stuff, years ago, people talked about it as this thing over there.
Yeah.
And now it's just part of investment. And I think this will go the same way. Ben's giving you examples of new kind of asset classes that will be there, and they'll just become asset classes that you're used to. Whereas at the moment, they're all new, but there's lots of things that were new 10 years ago that are normal now.
Bobby?
Yeah, and I say the schemes that are running on that are still running on. I think the main fund would be one that's investing to invest in make the world a better place, whether it's biodiversity, climate change. Yeah, I think these will be also integral into the economies of the world, and these will be the fastest growing companies and the big companies out there. So I hope the default growth fund isn't a index tracking fund which just invests in everything. We've seen 2 or 3 large pension schemes in the last year move out of general index tracking because of the fact that there's then no view on biodiversity, no view on climate change. And I hope that in 10 years' time, no pension trustee board feels they can just take a zero view on climate change. And I think partly that's now because that's the only choice they've got. But hopefully in 10 years' time, there's plenty of nice, easy choices for pension schemes so they don't have to just invest generally in an index tracking fund.
And Ben, from you, in terms of making nature investable,
Yeah,
what does it look like in 10 years?
so we've got BNG, which is 1 or 2 sectors in a small country. It's mandatory and it's for restoration, and I think we're going to see all of those expand. So lots more sectors pulled into it, properly international, with some way of linking the Dutch system to the English and all this. So we're putting biodiversity restoration in the right parts of the world that prioritize it. I think we'll be conservation markets. So BNG is all about making nature better. It's restoring, but we need to have a market system that conserves because it's more efficient to conserve than to destroy and then regrow. BNG is mandatory. I think we'll see more and more big corporates looking at things from a voluntary perspective in the same way, big businesses like to do their carbon offset when they're doing aviation travel and what have you. I think we'll start to see a real growth in both personal and corporate voluntary nature markets too.
Great, thank you. So just about to wrap up. So perhaps Mark, Bobby, Ben, I could just invite you each just to give me a short sort of final key point you would like people to take away. Bobby, start with you.
Yeah, so my key point would be to ask the questions of your fund managers and consultants, because the more groundswell of opinion and pressure we get that way, the easier it will be to change the big things at the policy level.
Thank you. Mark?
Well, my thing would be just start. Don't think you have to be clever about this. Have some initial board training, talk to your fund managers, as Bobby said, focus on a few sectors, and maybe change your trustee stewardship priorities to get biodiversity on nature into it, so it becomes integral.
Ben?
Pull in favours. I've never known a sector like nature where everyone is as willing to share information, thoughts, ideas. It's the most collaborative part of my professional life. So call in favours, get people to come and talk to you and talk you through it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Mark, Bobby, Ben, for joining us for today and for that really engaging topic. We've covered a lot of things. It seems pretty clear to me that nature needs to be an integral part of trustees' thinking. There are many opportunities now for trustees to start to engage with the issue. If that starts at training, it starts at engaging with fund managers. And for large schemes, there are some real risk issues to manage when they're directly investing, whether it's in real estate or infrastructure, but also increasingly some nature-related opportunities for those direct investments as well. So it's clearly going to be a very interesting and evolving area and a really important area. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to everyone who's been on the webinar as well. We will issue a recording that you can, as I say, share with your friends and family, and wish everyone a very good day, and thanks very much.